Hi, I'm Stephanie Coe. I am with Beyond Housing. We are a nonprofit community development organization based in North St. Louis County, specifically in the 24-1 community. So 24-1 is actually 24 municipalities that make up the Normandy School District. These municipalities are actually fairly small. The entire population is around 40,000 people. And some of these municipalities are maybe a couple of hundred to a couple of thousand. So kind of thinking about some of the panels earlier today, I wanted to give a little bit more context of what created 24-1 in the first place, at least these very small municipalities. And a lot of it is based off of structural racism. So for example, these municipalities used to be almost 100% white, and they were created kind of in white flight. This is right in the suburbs of St. Louis City. So as populations moved around within the city itself, they moved into the suburbs, and they created a lot of these very small municipalities with restrictive covenants, really excluding a lot of people who could potentially come. What ended up happening was, and actually after, for example, projects like Hope 6, but as basically people migrated from the city, from these very dense public housing projects, they ended up moving into a lot of these inner suburbs and kind of inherited this really crazy political fragmentation. So that's just a little bit of background of why there are so many municipalities in this one school district. Essentially what happened is these municipalities had not traditionally worked together very much. And around 2008, with both the foreclosure crisis and then also the school district, Normandy, was on the brink of losing its accreditation. So a lot of these leaders, mayors, and other elected officials started meeting together to talk a little bit and try to strategize how do we really work together on these really large problems that none of our municipalities have the capacity to work on our own. They ended up inviting our organization, Beyond Housing, specifically to work on housing issues. But collectively, we recognize that home is much more than the house itself. Home is everything that makes up a thriving community. So we ended up working on a pretty robust community engagement process to essentially form the 24-1 community plan. And so this is a plan, again, with 24 communities, but one vision, which ended up being strong communities, successful children, and engaged families. We have a very broad definition of health that really is shown in this plan. We recognize that health outcomes really are impacted from where you live, and so working on things like affordable housing, but also working on things like good schools that are accredited, but also really quality education with wraparound services, early childhood and kindergarten readiness. And we also want to make sure that people have food access and other kinds of businesses. So one thing through the community planning process is we found out that people really wanted places to shop for groceries locally, and they wanted a health clinic. And those are both developments that we were able to get in the 24-1 community since then. I think in one way of us addressing some of these problems and issues and ideas that basically came up from this community plan is to try to take those ideas into action through collective impact and through a lot of partnerships. So for example, one coalition that we have is called 5 by Age 5, and this is a coalition of advocates, organizations, daycare providers, all to make sure that children have access and opportunities at an early age to get to be ready for kindergarten by the time they go into this school district. In addition to that, we also have a coalition specifically around wraparound services and basic needs, both around trauma, mental and behavioral health, but also around making sure that people have clothing and food and all those other basic needs that really make a difference in a child's success in school. In addition, we also have a few more traditionally health-oriented coalitions. We have a Healthy Communities Coalition that came about through a grant specifically on childhood obesity. So this is a cross-sector group of youth organizations as well as health organizations working to improve child wellness in the community, and that has since expanded. That coalition first came about specifically again around childhood obesity, but definitely recognizing that there's a lot more, first of all, a much more holistic view of health that people want to work on, more around wellness and positive language, not necessarily just thinking about obesity and the metrics that come up with that. And so specifically also doing more health and needs assessments, both through this specific grant, but also outside of the grant. And so this coalition is now starting to expand more around healthcare, healthcare access, and also other kinds of wellness activities. One other thing that I wanted to talk about with the, I guess, in terms of this 24-1 community is that it's a little bit unique because 24-1 is part of the larger St. Louis County, which is actually separate from St. Louis City. And St. Louis County itself has not necessarily provided the same support to the 24-1 area as it has to other wealthier areas in the county, unfortunately. I think one example of this was even the story of our health clinic, where essentially, again, a lot of community excitement around a health clinic. St. Louis County, under a Black-led administration, decided to put in a health clinic in our area, but after there's change in the leadership, they decided to pull out. So fortunately, our organization was able to find another healthcare provider to come in, but that was a few years later. And I think that's just one example of the importance of really focusing on community empowerment and power within the local community as well. I think it's really important to work on policy advocacy, both on a county level, on a local municipal level, and on a state level. But being that we are in a supermajority red state, and also, again, a county government that has shown that they're not super interested in putting some certain kinds of investment in the 24-1 specifically, it's really important to do as much as we can independently while continuing to advocate on a larger level. In terms of additional resources and capacities that have been really helpful for us in sustaining some of our community health partnerships, I think, of course, one thing that everybody's hit on today is having a backbone agency, dedicated staff to really keep all of these partners accountable. One thing that I think is also very important is having a common agenda that really supersedes these individual interests and agendas from specific organizations. So one thing that we do have with one of our health coalitions is we had funding attached to it, so that was incredibly helpful. At the same time, everybody agreed from the very front that this is our goal. It's to improve child wellness in the Normandy School District and in 24-1, and that comes above any specific organizational agendas. And I think the organizations were actually very good at going about that, and even though they all had something to gain from being part of that coalition, it never seemed to be that organizations were just there for the money. They were really there for this larger vision. In addition, I think trust is really huge, both between partner organizations, but also with the larger community as well. So making sure, for example, in 24-1, there's been a lot of mistrust because a lot of organizations come in and then they leave. And so that's something that Beyond Housing, our organization, has really had to work to gain trust from people in the community and show that, we're really here to stay. We actually just made a huge investment and are relocating our offices. We actually had a bunch of different offices, some that used to be in more informal spaces like churches and old jails actually, and other kinds of spaces in the community, and now we've really invested and are having our headquarters based in the community in a former school building. And I think even though it's symbolic shifts where we're really showing this is somewhere that we're committed to and we're not going to come and leave, and we make sure that the partners who come around the table are aware of this as well and make sure that they're not here just for a year and then maybe getting grant dollars specifically to help these high-risk zip codes, for example, but they're really there for this larger vision. In addition, again, very important to have this entire work be community informed. And so making sure that everything that any action plan, action items that any of our coalitions work on, they're all based on some sort of community engagement and community feedback and not based on some projection of what we think the community needs. And finally, I think having short and long-term wins within a coalition is very important. We've had some shorter wins, like on a programmatic level, for example, around community campaigning. But we also know that we have these larger challenges like policy and built environments that we continue to work on as well. But we know that having these shorter wins really gets the coalitions and partners to continue to be engaged because they see some progress. I guess the final point in terms of some of our proudest accomplishments is that I'm very excited to announce that our school district is not yet officially unaccredited, but it's really on its way out. It's scored in the provisional accreditation range, and that is going to have a huge impact both on I guess, the morale and pride among people who have really stuck with the school district and worked to regain accreditation, but also, of course, just for better educational outcomes for the children at the school district. And again, largely in part because of all these different partnerships and investment made in the area. Finally, I think what we've talked about a little bit was just getting partners engaged and partners working together that haven't already, and really building a lot of relationships between different organizations, between community members, really for this larger common vision.
Thank you, Stephanie, Yesenia in Shelton.